I'm Amber, 28 years old. Eat this, my sister Rebecca said, grabbing my birthday cake and throwing it on the floor in front of everyone at my party. The room erupted in laughter as I stood there, frozen in shock. No one defended me. I swallowed my tears and, while cleaning the chocolate frosting off the hardwood floor on my hands and knees, she was toasting with my friends. But I didn't stay down. What I did next changed everything between us forever. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been completely humiliated by someone you trusted. You'll definitely want to stay for what happened next. Let me take a step back and explain how we got here. Growing up, Rebecca and I were supposed to be close. You know how people say sisters are best friends? That wasn't our story. Rebecca was 2 years younger, but somehow she always managed to make everything about her. When I graduated valedictorian, she threw a tantrum because I got more attention. When I landed my first job at a prestigious financial consulting firm, she sulked for weeks, claiming I was showing off. But here's the thing, I always felt sorry for her. Things always seemed to go wrong for Rebecca. She'd get fired from jobs for mysterious reasons. Her relationships would implode dramatically, and she could never seem to save money. As her older sister, and someone who was doing well financially, I felt obligated to help. Big mistake number 1. Over the years, I helped Rebecca with rent payments when she was short, covered her car repairs, paid for her groceries during tough months, and even bought her interview clothes for job applications. I justified it by telling myself that's what family does. We support each other, right? I convinced myself that my success meant I should lift others up, especially my baby sister. My parents loved this arrangement. They constantly praised me for being such a good sister, always highlighting how generous I was and how lucky Rebecca was to have me. It made me feel important, needed, valued for something beyond my professional achievements. I was the responsible one, the successful one, the one who had her life together enough to help others. What I didn't realize was that I was enabling a cycle that was about to blow up spectacularly in my face. Rebecca had become comfortable depending on my financial support, and somewhere along the way, it stopped being gratitude and started being expectation. Worse, it started becoming resentment. The birthday party was supposed to be a celebration. I had rented a beautiful event space, hired a caterer, and invited about 30 people, including family, close friends, and a few colleagues. I spent weeks planning every detail because I wanted it to be perfect. Turning 28 felt like a milestone. I had just received a major promotion. I had finally saved enough for a down payment on a condo, and life was really coming together. Rebecca had been acting strange all evening. She kept making little comments about the venue being expensive, loudly asking how much things cost, and mentioning to people that I must be doing really well financially to afford such a nice party. I should have seen the warning signs, but I was too focused on enjoying my celebration. The cake incident happened right after everyone sang happy birthday. I was standing there, feeling grateful and happy, surrounded by people I cared about when Rebecca suddenly stood up. She had a strange smile on her face as she walked over to where I was standing next to the beautiful 3-layer chocolate cake I'd ordered from my favorite bakery. "Speech time," she announced loudly, even though nobody had asked for speeches. The room quieted, with people expecting a sweet sister tribute. Instead, Rebecca looked directly at me and said, "Amber's always been so lucky. Everything just falls into her lap. Success, money, opportunities. Must be nice to never struggle for anything." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't the direction I expected her to go. "Rebecca," I started to say, but she wasn't finished. "Some of us work just as hard but don't get the same rewards. Some of us could really use the kind of luck Amber has." Her voice was growing louder and more bitter. People started to look uncomfortable. That's when she reached for my cake. In one swift motion, she grabbed it, and before I could react, she threw it down at my feet. "Eat this," she said with venom in her voice. "Maybe it'll teach you some humility." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before people started laughing. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to make me realize that some people had been waiting for me to be taken down a peg. Enough to show me who my real friends were, versus those who just enjoyed watching drama unfold. I looked around the room while crouched on the floor, picking up pieces of my birthday cake, and for the first time I saw everything clearly. My sister's jealousy wasn't just sibling rivalry, it was pure hatred. My family's encouragement of my generosity wasn't pride in my success, it was appreciation for my usefulness. and some of my friends weren't really friends at all. But you know what? Sometimes the worst moments bring the most clarity. Sometimes being humiliated is exactly what you need to finally see the truth about people. As I stood up from the floor, wiping chocolate from my hands, I made a decision that would change our relationship forever. I looked Rebecca directly in the eyes and said, "Thanks for the lesson. I learned something very important tonight." Then I turned to address the room. "Thank you all for coming. I think we're done here." I left my own party that night with chocolate stains on my dress and a completely new perspective on my life. What I did the next morning would shock everyone who thought they knew me. I woke up the next morning with chocolate still under my fingernails and a clarity I'd never experienced before. You know that feeling when you suddenly understand something that's been staring you in the face for years? That was me, lying in bed at 6 a.m., finally seeing the behavioral cycle I'd been blind to. Rebecca's cake incident wasn't just a moment of sibling jealousy. It was the culmination of years of carefully calculated behavior designed to keep me in my place while she benefited from my success. The more I thought about it, the more pieces clicked together. I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through my banking app. Over the past 3 years, I'd given Rebecca over $15,000. I sat there adding it up, the rent help, car payments, grocery money, emergency loans that were never paid back. I had been functioning as her personal ATM without even realizing it. But here's what really got to me. Every single time I helped her, she somehow made me feel like it wasn't enough. When I paid her rent, she'd complain that I didn't also cover her utilities. When I bought her groceries, she'd mention that she needed gas money too. When I helped with car repairs, she'd suggest that maybe I should just co-sign for a new car since hers was so unreliable. I had interpreted this as Rebecca just being overwhelmed and stressed. Poor thing couldn't catch a break. But I was wrong. She was training me to give more while making me feel guilty for having boundaries. My manipulative little sister had been playing the long game, and I had fallen for it completely. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Honey, Rebecca feels terrible about last night. She was just having a hard time and maybe had too much wine. You know how she gets when she's stressed about money. Maybe you could talk to her." There it was. Even after everything that happened, they still expected me to be the one to reach out. The responsible sister. The one who fixes things. Well, not anymore. I texted back. Rebecca owes me an apology. A real one. Until then, we have nothing to discuss. Mom's response came immediately. "Don't be dramatic, Amber. She's family. You know, she's struggling right now." Struggling. That was the magic word that had controlled me for years. Rebecca was always struggling, always in disaster mode, always needing rescue. But here's the thing about struggling. Some people work harder to get out of difficult situations, while others get comfortable being rescued. I started thinking about all the times Rebecca had sabotaged good opportunities. The job at the marketing firm she quit after 2 weeks because her boss was mean. The relationship with David, a really decent guy she dumped because he expected too much, meaning he wanted her to contribute equally on dates. The apartment she lost because she spent her rent money on a weekend trip instead of being responsible. Every disaster was someone else's fault. Every setback was because life was unfair. Every failure was due to circumstances beyond her control. And Big Sister Amber was always there to swoop in and fix things, which meant Rebecca never had to face consequences or learn from her mistakes. I called my best friend, Sarah, who had been at the party and witnessed the whole cake incident. "Sarah, I need you to be completely honest with me about something." "Shoot," she said. I could hear her making coffee in the background. "How long have you thought Rebecca was taking advantage of me?" Silence, a long silence. Then, "Amber, I've been waiting for you to see it for literally years." That hit me harder than I expected. "Why didn't you say anything? Would you have listened? You always had an excuse for her behavior. You'd explain away every manipulative thing she did as stress or bad luck or whatever. I figured you'd have to realize it yourself." Sarah was right. I had been making excuses for Rebecca constantly. When she'd show up at my apartment unannounced expecting dinner, I called it being spontaneous. When she'd borrow my clothes without asking and return them damaged, I called it being close sisters. When she'd flirt with guys I was dating and then claim she was just being friendly, I called it a misunderstanding. "The cake thing was awful," Sarah continued, "but honestly, I was relieved someone finally saw her true colors. People were laughing. I said quietly. Some people were the wrong people. But I saw Lisa's face, and Monica's, and James from your office. They were horrified. The people who mattered saw exactly what it was. A cruel, calculated attack designed to humiliate me in public. After we hung up, I sat with that for a while. The people who mattered had seen the truth. The people who didn't matter had been entertained. The question now was, what was I going to do about it? I opened my laptop and started writing an email. Not to Rebecca. She didn't deserve my energy right now. I wrote to my parents, to my aunt who'd been at the party, and to my cousin who'd laughed the loudest when the cake hit the floor. Last night showed me clearly where I stand with this family. Moving forward, I'll be adjusting my relationships accordingly. Rebecca will no longer receive financial support from me. And I'll be taking a step back from family functions until people can treat me with basic respect. I didn't send it immediately. Instead, I saved it as a draft and went for a run to clear my head. As I jogged through my neighborhood, I thought about all the things I could have done with that $15,000 I'd given away over the years. I could have upgraded my kitchen, taken a vacation to Europe, invested in my retirement fund, or simply kept it as security. But you know what? I didn't regret helping when I thought it was genuine need. What I regretted was not seeing the scheme sooner. What I regretted was teaching Rebecca that I was available to be used and then humiliated. When I got home, I sent the email. Then I blocked Rebecca's number. Not permanently, but until I was ready to have a conversation on my terms, not hers. The responses started coming within an hour. My parents were disappointed in my reaction. My aunt thought I was being oversensitive. My cousin didn't respond at all, which told me everything I needed to know about where his loyalties lay. Only my Uncle Mark, my dad's brother, sent a message that surprised me. About time you set some boundaries with that girl. We've all been watching this routine for years, so some people had seen it. Some people had been waiting for me to wake up. Well, I was awake now, and Rebecca was about to learn what happened when the Bank of Amber permanently closed its doors. 3 days after the cake incident, Rebecca showed up at my apartment building. I saw her from my window sitting on the front steps like a lost puppy, clearly going for maximum sympathy points. Classic Rebecca move. If direct communication doesn't work, try the helpless waif. Because nothing says mature adult like camping outside someone's building, right? I watched her for about 20 minutes before deciding to go down. Not because I felt sorry for her, but because I wanted to see what her next strategy would be. When dealing with master manipulators, it's educational to observe their tactics. Amber. She jumped up when she saw me, tears already streaming down her face. I've been trying to call you for days. Why won't you answer my texts? Because I have nothing to say to you right now, I replied calmly, not moving closer. I stayed about 6 feet away, arms crossed, letting her see that this conversation would happen on my terms. I messed up, she said, her tears flowing harder now. I was drunk and stupid, and I took out my frustrations on you. It wasn't fair. I waited. There had to be more. Rebecca never apologized without an agenda. I've been having such a hard time lately, she continued. I lost my job last week and I'm behind on rent again, and I just snapped. You know how I get when I'm stressed. There it was, the setup. First, the tearful apology, then the sob story, then the implied request for help. She was following her usual script perfectly. So you destroyed my birthday cake in front of 30 people because you lost your job? I asked. I know how it looked, but you have to understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I interrupted. You were embarrassed about your situation, so you decided to embarrass me. You were feeling small, so you tried to make me feel smaller. You needed to be the center of attention, so you hijacked my celebration. Rebecca's crying stopped abruptly. She hadn't expected me to see through her so clearly. That's not... I didn't plan it, really, she stammered, because it seemed pretty calculated to me. You chose the exact moment when everyone was watching. You made sure to announce it loudly enough for the whole room to hear, and you picked an action that would create maximum humiliation. That doesn't sound impulsive, Rebecca. That sounds strategic. She tried a different approach. I was jealous. Okay. You have everything so easy, and I struggle with everything. Sometimes it's hard watching your sister succeed when you can't get anything right. I almost laughed. Easy? You think my success has been easy? Well, you've always been naturally good at... Stop. I held up my hand. I worked 60-hour weeks for 3 years to get my promotion. I studied for my CPA certification while working full-time. I saved every penny by living in a studio apartment and cooking at home while you were going out to bars every weekend. Nothing about my success has been easy. Rebecca's face shifted again. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out which approach would work. I'm sorry, she said finally. I really am, and I promise I'll pay you back for all the money you've lent me. I just need a little more time. No, I said simply. No to what? No to all of it. No more money, no more loans, no more emergency help, no more bailing you out of situations you created. Her tears dried up completely now, replaced by something much uglier. You're really going to abandon your own sister over one mistake? One mistake? I couldn't help but laugh. Rebecca, you've been systematically taking advantage of me for years. The cake was just the moment I finally saw it clearly. I haven't taken advantage of anyone. You offered to help me. And how many times have you paid me back? How many times have you said thank you without immediately asking for something else? How many times have you celebrated my successes without finding a way to make them about your struggles? She couldn't answer, because we both knew the truth. 0 times. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice getting harder. Family helps family. That's what we do. Really? When have you helped me, Rebecca? When I was stressed about my CPA exam, did you offer support? When I was working those 60-hour weeks, did you ever bring me dinner or just check in? When I got my promotion, did you celebrate with me or immediately start complaining about your own job situation? Again, silence. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to figure out your own problems. You're going to find a job and keep it. You're going to pay your own rent and handle your own emergencies. And maybe, if you can do that for a significant period of time without asking me for anything, we can work on rebuilding our relationship. And if I can't? She asked, her voice turning cold. Then I guess you'll learn what consequences feel like for the first time in your adult life. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine surprise that I wasn't caving. Rebecca had never encountered a version of me that said no and meant it. Mom and Dad are going to hear about this, she said finally. I'm sure they will. In fact, I'll save you the trouble, I said, pulling out my phone and calling my mother right there, putting it on speaker. Hi, honey, Mom answered. Rebecca said she was going to try to talk to you today. She did. I told her I won't be providing financial support anymore, and that she needs to figure out her own problems. Amber. Mom's voice took on that disapproving tone I knew so well. Don't you think you're being a bit harsh? She made a mistake, but she's family. Mom, would you throw my birthday cake on the floor in front of 30 people? Of course not. But would you expect me to just get over it if he did? That's different. No, it's not. Rebecca humiliated me in public because she was jealous of my success. That's not a mistake. That's a choice, and I'm choosing not to reward that behavior anymore. I could hear Mom sighing. She needs help. Amber. She's struggling. Then maybe she should struggle harder instead of expecting me to solve her problems. Have you ever experienced that moment when you realize you've been everyone's safety net? But nobody's been yours? Drop a comment below if you've ever felt like the family ATM. After I hung up, Rebecca and I stood there looking at each other. Finally, she spoke. You're going to regret this. Maybe, I said, but I'll regret it a lot less than I regret enabling you for the past 3 years. She turned and walked away without another word. As I watched her go, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't responsible for fixing Rebecca's life. She was 26 years old, and it was time she started acting like it. The family pressure started immediately. By the end of the week, I'd received concerned calls from my parents, disappointed texts from relatives, and even a lecture from my grandmother about the importance of family loyalty. Apparently, Rebecca had launched a full-scale campaign to paint herself as the victim of my sudden cruelty. According to the story making the rounds through our family, I'd become cold and heartless after getting my promotion. Success had gone to my head, and now I was too good to help my struggling sister. Poor Rebecca was being abandoned in her time of need by her selfish, money-obsessed sibling. It would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. Rebecca had turned victimhood into an art form. The breaking point came when my dad called me at work. Amber, I need you to come by the house tonight. We're having a family meeting about this situation with Rebecca. What situation? I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. Don't play dumb. Your sister is about to be evicted and you're sitting on enough money to help her, but refusing out of spite. That's not the daughter we raised. I took a deep breath. Dad, has it occurred to you to ask why Rebecca is about to be evicted? She lost her job. She was fired for showing up late repeatedly and arguing with customers. I heard this from multiple sources who actually know what happened. Silence on the other end. And this isn't the first time, I continued. This is a routine. She gets fired, falls behind on bills, creates a disaster and expects me to fix it. Well, I'm not fixing it anymore. Family helps family, he said, repeating Rebecca's favorite guilt trip. Really? When's the last time Rebecca helped anyone but herself? When's the last time she showed up for family events without needing something? When's the last time she celebrated anyone's success without making it about her problems? My dad couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. I'll be at your meeting, I said finally. But not to be lectured. I'm coming to set the record straight. That evening, I arrived at my parents' house to find Rebecca already in full victim mode, sitting on the couch with red-rimmed eyes and tissues in hand. My parents flanked her like protective guards, and the whole scene was clearly staged for maximum emotional impact. Thank you for coming, Mom said stiffly, as if I were some kind of monster who might not show up to help her family. Let me start, I said before anyone else could speak, because I think there are some facts that need to be clarified. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Over the past 3 years, I've given Rebecca $15,247 in various forms of financial assistance. Rent help, car repairs, grocery money, utility bills, and emergency loans. Rebecca, how much of that have you paid back? She stared at me like I'd slapped her. I didn't keep track of exact amounts. I did. The answer is 0. You've paid back exactly $0. My parents looked uncomfortable, but I wasn't finished. Furthermore, during those same 3 years, Rebecca has had 7 different jobs. 7. Each time she was let go, the story she told us blamed external factors. Difficult bosses, unfair treatment, company problems. Jobs are hard to find, Rebecca started. For people who show up on time and do their work, jobs aren't that hard to keep, I interrupted. The truth is, Rebecca has developed a reputation for being unreliable and difficult to work with. Rebecca's face turned red. You investigated me. I paid attention to inconsistencies in your stories. Because here's the thing, I continued. When someone's asking for money constantly, it's reasonable to want to understand why they need it. My mother looked between us uncertainly. Amber, even if that's true, she's still your sister. And I'm still her sister, I replied. Which is why I'm not enabling this behavior anymore. Real family help means sometimes letting people face consequences so they can learn and grow. This is ridiculous, Rebecca burst out. You have plenty of money. You live in a nice apartment. You have a good job. You can afford to help me without even noticing the expense. There it was, the entitlement that had been lurking under all her sob stories. You're right, I said calmly. I do have money. I have money because I show up to work every day. I pay my bills on time. I live within my means, and I save for emergencies. You know what I don't do? I don't expect other people to fund my lifestyle. My lifestyle? She screeched. I'm talking about basic survival. Basic survival doesn't include eating out 4 times a week, buying designer clothes you can't afford, and taking weekend trips while claiming you can't pay rent. My dad shifted uncomfortably. How do you know about that? Because I pay attention. I see her social media posts. I notice when she's wearing expensive clothes while asking me for grocery money. I'm not blind, Dad. The room fell silent except for Rebecca's sniffling. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. Rebecca is going to figure out her housing situation without my money. She's going to find a job and keep it for more than 3 months. She's going to learn to budget and live within her means. And maybe after she's demonstrated that she can be a responsible adult, we can work on rebuilding our relationship. And if she gets evicted, Mom asked, then she'll learn what happens when you don't pay your rent. Maybe staying with friends or finding a roommate situation will motivate her to keep her next job. Rebecca stood up abruptly. I can't believe you're all just going to sit here and let her abandon me. I'm not abandoning you, I said. I'm giving you the opportunity to prove you can handle your own life. This is all because of the stupid cake, isn't it? She demanded. I smiled sadly. Rebecca, the cake was just the moment I realized you don't actually care about me at all. You care about what I can do for you. There's a difference. She stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. My parents sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Dad spoke. Maybe you're being too harsh. Maybe you've been too lenient, I replied. She's 26 years old and has never faced a single consequence for her choices. How is that helping her? I stood to leave. I love Rebecca, but I won't be manipulated by her anymore. And I won't be guilted into enabling behavior that's ultimately hurting her. As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in months. Setting boundaries felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. Rebecca would either learn to stand on her own, or she'd continue to struggle. But either way, it wouldn't be my responsibility anymore. 2 weeks later, Rebecca tried a different strategy. Instead of coming to me directly, she sent flying monkeys, family members, to guilt me into changing my mind. It started with my cousin Michelle calling to tell me how worried everyone was about Rebecca's situation. She's really struggling. Amber. I saw her at the grocery store using coupons for everything, and she looked so sad and thin. Don't you feel bad about cutting her off? I almost laughed. Rebecca had never used a coupon in her life when I was paying for her groceries. Funny how quickly people learn to budget when they have to. Michelle, did Rebecca tell you why I stopped helping her financially? She hesitated. She said, You two had a fight and you're being vindictive. Of course she did. Did she mention throwing my birthday cake on the floor in front of 30 people? Silence. Or that in 3 years, she never paid back a single dollar of the $15,000 I gave her. Or that she's been fired from 7 jobs for performance issues. She didn't mention those details, Michelle said quietly. I'm sure she didn't. Rebecca is excellent at telling partial truths that make her look like a victim. The next messenger was my Aunt Linda, who tried the family duty angle. Amber, I know Rebecca can be difficult, but she's family. We don't abandon family. Aunt Linda, would you repeatedly lend money to someone who never paid you back and treated you badly? That's different. No, it's not. Family doesn't mean accepting abuse and financial exploitation. It means caring enough to not enable destructive behavior. But the most infuriating messenger was my mother's guilt trip attempt. She called me crying about how the family was falling apart, and how disappointed my deceased grandmother would be to see siblings fighting. Mom, Grandma, would be more disappointed to see one granddaughter taking advantage of another's generosity and kindness. You're being so cold. Amber, this isn't like you. Maybe the old me was too much of a pushover. Maybe this is exactly like me when I stopped letting people walk all over me. The pressure campaign might have worked on the old Amber. The old Amber who needed everyone to like her and who believed that keeping peace was more important than self-respect. But the new Amber had clarity about manipulation tactics, and I could see exactly what was happening. Rebecca was using family members as weapons, feeding them carefully edited versions of our situation to create maximum guilt and pressure. She knew she couldn't convince me directly anymore, so she was trying to create a family-wide consensus that I was being unreasonable. The strategy backfired when I started sharing the full story with each flying monkey who contacted me. Once family members learned about the systematic financial exploitation, the unpaid loans, the job issues, and especially the birthday cake incident, most of them backed off quickly. Uncle Mark, who had supported my boundary setting from the beginning, started forwarding me messages from other family members who were sharing their own Rebecca stories. Apparently, I wasn't the only one she'd been scheming against. My cousin Jake revealed that Rebecca had borrowed his car for a weekend and returned it with a dent she never mentioned. My Aunt Carol shared that Rebecca had asked to stay at her house for a few days and ended up camping there for 3 weeks, eating their food and using their utilities without contributing anything. Even Michelle called back to apologize after talking to other family members. I had no idea about the routine, she said. Rebecca made it sound like you just suddenly decided to be mean to her. The most telling revelation came from my Uncle Tom, who worked in HR for a large company. I can't give details due to confidentiality, he said carefully. But let's just say that if Rebecca applies for a job anywhere in this industry, her references are going to be problematic. Apparently, Word was getting around about Rebecca's work ethic and attitude problems. She was developing a reputation that would make finding good employment increasingly difficult. Meanwhile, my own life was improving dramatically. Without the constant stress of Rebecca's emergencies, I was sleeping better, focusing more at work, and actually enjoying my free time. The money I wasn't giving to her was building up in my savings account, creating a genuine emergency fund for actual emergencies. I also started paying attention to people in my life who gave as much as they took. Sarah, who had been patient during all my Rebecca-related drama and never asked for anything in return. My coworker James, who had helped me with a project when I was overwhelmed and refused my offer to buy him dinner as thanks. My neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who accepted delivery packages for me and never expected compensation. These were healthy relationships. Mutual respect, genuine care, balanced give and take. The contrast with Rebecca's one-sided demands was stark. 3 weeks after implementing my no-money policy, I got a text from Rebecca at 2 a.m. "I'm going to be homeless tomorrow if I don't come up with rent money. Please, I'm begging you." The old me would have panicked and transferred money immediately. The new me recognized this as manufactured urgency designed to bypass my rational decision-making. I texted back, "I'm sorry you're in this situation. Have you contacted social services about emergency housing assistance? Have you reached out to your employer about advanced pay? Have you asked your friends about temporary housing while you figure things out?" Her response was immediate. "I can't believe you're giving me a social services lecture instead of helping your own sister." I replied, "I'm giving you a list of actual solutions instead of enabling your routine of creating emergencies and expecting me to fix them." She didn't respond, which told me she wasn't actually interested in solutions. She wanted a rescue again. The next morning, I learned through family gossip that Rebecca had found a place to stay. Turns out when people know they can't count on their usual safety net, they discover other options pretty quickly. Who knew? A month after cutting off financial support, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about Rebecca's struggles. It started when my coworker Lisa mentioned seeing someone who looked like my sister at an expensive restaurant downtown. She was with a guy I recognized from the country club, Lisa said casually. They seemed to be celebrating something. She was wearing a gorgeous dress that looked like it cost more than my monthly car payment. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. Rebecca was supposedly so broke she couldn't make rent. Yet, she was dining at restaurants I couldn't afford and wearing designer clothes. That evening, I did something I probably should have done years ago. I looked at Rebecca's social media more carefully. What I found made my blood boil. Her Instagram was full of photos from the past month showing her at upscale bars wearing expensive outfits and showing off what appeared to be a new designer handbag. The posts were carefully captioned with quotes about living your best life and treating yourself because you deserve it. But the real revelation came when I scrolled back further and started paying attention to the timeline. During the exact periods when Rebecca was crying to me about being unable to afford groceries, she'd been posting pictures of elaborate brunches and shopping hauls. I screenshotted everything and created a side-by-side comparison. On one side, Rebecca's text messages to me begging for money because she couldn't afford basic necessities. On the other side, her social media posts from the same time periods showing expensive meals, new clothes, and entertainment. The evidence was overwhelming. Rebecca hadn't been struggling to survive. She'd been struggling to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford while using me as her personal financing plan. I called Sarah immediately. "Need to show you something that's going to make you want to drive over to Rebecca's apartment and shake her." 20 minutes later, Sarah was sitting on my couch scrolling through the evidence on my laptop. "Oh my God. Amber, she's been running a complete scam on you for years," I said, the full scope of the betrayal hitting me. Every sob story, every emergency, every desperate plea for help, all while she was living beyond her means and documenting it online. Sarah pointed to a particularly infuriating post. "Look at this one. She's literally holding a cocktail that costs $30 while the caption talks about struggling through tough times. The audacity is breathtaking. I felt like an idiot. How had I missed this? How had I been so gullible? Because nothing says financial emergency like posting photos of your weekend spa retreat. Right? Don't blame yourself," Sarah said, reading my expression. "Manipulators are good at compartmentalizing. She showed you exactly what she wanted you to see while hiding the rest." The next day, I confronted Rebecca with the evidence. I printed out the most damning comparisons and met her at a coffee shop near her apartment. She walked in wearing yet another outfit I'd never seen before, looking nervous, but trying to maintain her usual confidence. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, sitting down carefully. "I was hoping we could work things out." "We can," I said, sliding the printed photos across the table. "But first, I want you to explain these." Rebecca's face went white as she looked at the side-by-side comparisons. I watched her scramble mentally, trying to come up with explanations that would make sense. "Those posts? They're old," she said finally. "They're not. They're time-stamped. This photo of you with a $200 dinner is from the same day you texted me crying about not being able to afford groceries. Someone else paid for that dinner. Rebecca, stop. Just stop lying." She sat back in her chair, caught. For the first time since I'd known her, she couldn't talk her way out of a situation. "How long?" I asked quietly. "How long have you been living a double life while making me feel guilty for having money?" She stared at the table for a long moment. When she finally looked up, I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Shame. "Since the beginning," she whispered. "Since the beginning of what?" "Since you started making good money. I was jealous." "Okay. You had this great job and this nice life, and I felt left behind. When you offered to help me that first time with rent, it felt like you owed me something, like the universe was balancing things out." I felt sick. "So you created fake emergencies to justify taking my money while spending your own money on luxury items?" "Not fake emergencies. I really did need help with rent and bills, but I also wanted to have nice things sometimes. I wanted to feel successful too." "So, you use my money for necessities and your money for fun?" She nodded miserably. "Do you have any idea how manipulative that is? Do you understand that you've been essentially stealing from me for years? I always intended to pay you back. With what money? You were spending everything you made on maintaining a lifestyle you couldn't afford." Other coffee shop patrons were starting to stare, but I didn't care. Years of suppressed anger were finally finding their voice. "The birthday cake," I continued, my voice getting harder. "That wasn't about being drunk or stressed. That was about punishing me for having boundaries you couldn't cross anymore." Rebecca's tears started flowing. But they looked different now. Not manipulative tears designed to gain sympathy, but genuine grief for what she'd destroyed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Amber. I never meant for it to go this far." "Yes, you did. Every time you asked for more money, every time you created a new emergency, every time you made me feel guilty for questioning you, that was intentional." I gathered up the photos and stood to leave. "What do I do now?" she asked desperately. "You figure out how to live within your actual means. You get a job and keep it. You face the consequences of your choices, and maybe someday, you find a way to make amends for 3 years of lies and scheming. Will you ever forgive me?" I looked at her sitting there, finally stripped of all her manipulative tools, facing the reality of what she'd done. Part of me felt sorry for her, but a bigger part of me felt free. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Ask me again when you've learned to be honest." As I walked away from that coffee shop, I realized something important. The sister I thought I was helping didn't actually exist. The Rebecca who struggled with bad luck and needed support was a fiction created to exploit my generosity. The real Rebecca was someone who felt entitled to my success and resentful of my happiness. Understanding that distinction changed everything. The revelation about Rebecca's double life should have been the end of our story, but it was actually just the beginning of the real drama. Because Rebecca, faced with the collapse of her long-term scheme, decided to go nuclear. It started with her showing up at my workplace. I was in the middle of a client presentation when my assistant knocked on the conference room door. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, looking uncomfortable, "but there's someone here claiming to be your sister, and she's crying very loudly in the lobby." My stomach dropped. Through the glass wall, I could see Rebecca in the reception area, tissue in hand, speaking animatedly to anyone who would listen. She was putting on a performance, and my coworkers were the unwilling audience. "Excuse me for just a moment," I told my clients, forcing a professional smile. "Please continue reviewing the portfolio analysis. I'll be right back. I walked, out to find Rebecca in full victim mode, telling the receptionist how her heartless sister had abandoned her in her time of need. Several of my colleagues had gathered around, drawn by the commotion. "Rebecca," I said firmly, "this is my workplace. You need to leave." "Amber," she cried, turning to face me with tears streaming down her face. "Please, I just need 5 minutes to talk to you. I'm desperate." The whole lobby went silent. Everyone was watching our family drama unfold like an episode of a soap opera. "Not here," I said quietly. "You know better than this. I wouldn't have come here if you answered my calls. I'm about to lose everything because my own sister won't help me." I could feel my coworkers' eyes on me, judging. Here was this sobbing young woman claiming her sister was cruel and heartless, and there I was, looking cold and professional in my business suit. Without context, I was definitely the villain in this scene. "Excuse us," I said to the room in general, then took Rebecca's arm and guided her toward the elevators. "Conference room 3, I told her. Now, once we were alone, Rebecca's tears stopped immediately. "You need to start helping me again," she said without preamble. "Are you insane?" I asked. "You just humiliated me in front of my clients and colleagues. I'll keep doing it until you start acting like family again." I stared at her, speechless. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm doing whatever it takes to survive. You cut me off, and now I'm facing real consequences. I need money, Amber, and you have it. Get a job, Rebecca, like normal people do. I've been trying, but everywhere I apply, they want references, and apparently word has gotten around about my work history. Nobody will hire me for anything decent. That's not my fault. That's the result of your choices." "It's partially your fault," she snapped. "You could have kept helping me while I figured things out. Instead, you decided to teach me some cruel lesson, and now I'm paying the price." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even after being caught in years of lies and schemes, she was still trying to make this my fault. "Rebecca, you've been lying to me for 3 years. You've been using my money to subsidize a lifestyle you couldn't afford while pretending to be broke. You humiliated me at my own birthday party, and somehow I'm the bad guy here." "I made mistakes," she said. "But I'm still your sister. Family forgives family. Family doesn't systematically exploit family." She tried a different approach, softening her voice. "Amber, I know I screwed up. I know I need to change, but I can't change if I'm homeless and starving. Just help me get stable, and then I'll pay you back everything." It was almost impressive how quickly she could shift tactics, threats, then anger, then manipulation, then false vulnerability. Rebecca had a whole toolkit of emotional weapons. "No," I said simply. Her face hardened again. "Fine, then you leave me no choice." "What's that supposed to mean?" She smiled, and there was something genuinely frightening about it. "It means I'm going to tell everyone the truth about what kind of person you really are, how you abandoned your struggling sister to protect your precious money, how you chose greed over family." "Go ahead," I said. "Tell them. But while you're at it, tell them about the $15,000 you took from me. Tell them about the lies and the fake emergencies. Tell them about the designer clothes and expensive dinners you were buying while claiming you couldn't afford food." Her confidence faltered slightly, but she pressed on. "Nobody will care about those details when they hear how you let your own sister become homeless. Rebecca, if you think people will side with you once they know the full story, you're even more delusional than I thought." "We'll see," she said, standing up. "We'll see who people believe, the heartless, successful sister or the struggling victim." After she left, I sat in that conference room for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Rebecca had essentially declared war on me. She was going to weaponize family relationships and public opinion to force me back into my old role as her personal ATM. I returned to my presentation, apologized for the interruption, and managed to finish the meeting professionally. But inside, I was furious. Rebecca had crossed a line by bringing her drama into my workplace, and now she was threatening to escalate further. That evening, I called Sarah and told her about the confrontation. "She's desperate," Sarah said. "When people's primary coping mechanism gets taken away, they either learn new skills or they double down on destructive behavior. Guess which path Rebecca chose. What do you think she'll do next?" "Honestly, I think she'll try to turn your family against you. She'll paint herself as the abandoned victim, and you as the cold, successful sister who forgot where she came from." Sarah was right. By the next day, I was getting concerned calls from relatives who had heard Rebecca's version of our workplace confrontation. According to her story, she'd come to me for help in her darkest hour, and I had security throw her out of my office building. "Is it true you called security on your own sister?" my Aunt Carol asked. "No, it's not true. I took her to a private conference room and told her that my workplace wasn't appropriate for family discussions. But she said you were cold and refused to help her." "Aunt Carol, did she mention that she's been lying to me for years about how she spends money? Or that she threw my birthday cake on the floor in front of 30 people? Another relative who hadn't heard the full story asked. Rebecca was working systematically through our family, telling carefully edited versions of events designed to make me look like a monster. What do you think will happen next? Is Rebecca going to keep escalating, or will family members start seeing through her manipulation? Drop a comment with your prediction. This war between us was just beginning, and I had a feeling Rebecca was going to get much more creative with her attacks before this was over. Rebecca's campaign against me intensified over the next 2 weeks. She was smart about it. Instead of making obvious attacks that would make her look vindictive, she positioned herself as the heartbroken sister who just wanted her family back together. She started showing up at family gatherings I didn't attend, playing the role of the abandoned sibling. She'd sit quietly in the corner looking sad until someone asked what was wrong, then reluctantly share how difficult things had been since her successful sister decided money was more important than family. My cousin Michelle called me after one of these performances. "Rebecca was at Uncle Mike's barbecue yesterday. She barely ate anything and kept checking her phone like she was hoping for a call from you. It was actually kind of heartbreaking. Michelle, did she mention that she's been lying to me for 3 years about financial emergencies while spending money on designer clothes? She said you accused her of that, but she claims those accusations are based on misunderstandings about timing and circumstances." Of course she did. Rebecca was rewriting history, turning her elaborate deceptions into innocent misunderstandings that her suspicious sister had blown out of proportion. But the most infuriating part was how effective her strategy was. Family members who had initially supported my boundary setting were starting to waver. The combination of Rebecca's pitiful presentations and the passage of time was making people forget exactly why I'd cut her off in the first place. My mother called me on a Thursday evening, clearly having been designated as the family mediator. "Amber, I think it's time you and Rebecca sat down and worked things out. Mom, she threatened me at my workplace and promised to destroy my reputation if I don't give her money. That's not someone I can reason with. She's desperate, honey. People do things they don't mean when they're desperate." She meant it. Rebecca has been calculating and strategic about this whole situation. Nothing she's done has been out of desperation. "I think you're being too harsh in your judgment of her intentions." That phrase, "too harsh," was becoming the family's go-to criticism of my behavior. I was being too harsh when I expected honesty. Too harsh when I refused to fund Rebecca's lifestyle. Too harsh when I maintained boundaries after being manipulated and humiliated. Apparently, the only acceptable response to abuse was to smile and ask for more. The breaking point came when Rebecca escalated to involving my professional network. She somehow found out about a work conference I was attending and showed up at the hotel bar where my colleagues and I were having drinks after the first day of sessions. I was deep in conversation with a potential client when I saw her walk in. She'd dressed carefully. Not too nice because that would contradict her poverty story, but not too shabby either. She looked like someone trying to put on a brave face during difficult times. She spotted me and began walking over with a determined expression. I excused myself quickly and intercepted her before she could reach my table. "What are you doing here, Rebecca? I heard you were in town for a conference. I thought maybe we could talk." You followed me to my work conference. How did you even know where I was staying? I called your office and said I was your sister trying to coordinate a surprise for your birthday. Your assistant mentioned the hotel name. The schemes never stopped. Rebecca had lied to my assistant to get information about my location, then traveled to a different city to ambush me at a professional event. You need to leave, I said quietly, aware that my colleagues were probably watching us. Just give me 5 minutes. I promise I won't cause a scene. Like you promised you wouldn't cause a scene at my office. Amber, please. I'm trying to apologize. Against my better judgment, I agreed to step outside with her. We found a quiet spot in the hotel courtyard away from the conference attendees. I'm sorry, she began, and for a moment, she almost sounded sincere. I know I've handled this badly. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm really struggling, and I don't know what else to do. Rebecca, you've been lying to me for years. You've manipulated our family into thinking I'm cruel for not enabling your behavior. You've shown up at my workplace and now at my work conference. This isn't about struggling. This is about control. Maybe I have been controlling, she admitted. Maybe I learned to manipulate people because it was the only way to get what I needed. But that doesn't mean my feelings aren't real. It was a clever admission, acknowledging some wrongdoing while maintaining that her core grievances were legitimate. What exactly do you want from me? I asked. I want my sister back. I want us to be family again. Being family doesn't mean I have to fund your lifestyle. I know that now. I'm not asking for money anymore. I just want a relationship with you. For a brief moment, I almost believed her. The combination of her sincere tone and my own exhaustion from months of family pressure made me want to find a way back to normal. But then I remembered something. Rebecca, 3 hours ago, you posted on social media about how sometimes family members show their true colors during tough times. You're still running your victim campaign even while asking me for reconciliation. Her face shifted, the mask slipping for just a second. That post wasn't about you specifically. It was posted the same day you decided to show up at my work conference. Everything you do is calculated, Rebecca. Even this conversation. She tried to maintain her innocent expression, but I could see the anger building behind her eyes. You know what your problem is, Amber? She said, her voice sharp. You think you're so much smarter than everyone else. You think you can see through people and understand their motivations better than they understand themselves. I think I can recognize behavioral routines when they're pointed out to me repeatedly. You want to know the truth? She said, her voice getting harder. I do resent your success. I do think it's unfair that everything comes so easily to you while I have to struggle for everything. And yes, I probably did take advantage of your generosity because it felt like cosmic justice. Finally, some honesty. But you know what else is true, she continued. You liked being needed. You liked being the successful sister who could swoop in and save the day. You got something out of that dynamic too. So, don't pretend you were just an innocent victim. That hit harder than I expected, because there was some truth to it. I had enjoyed feeling useful and important. I had gotten satisfaction from being the family success story who could help others. You might be right about that, I said slowly. Maybe I did enable the dynamic because it made me feel good about myself. But that doesn't excuse 3 years of lies and schemes, and it doesn't excuse abandoning me when I actually needed help. We stared at each other in the hotel courtyard, both finally speaking truthfully about our resentments and motivations. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had, but it also made clear that we were fundamentally incompatible as people. I think we want different things from a sister relationship, I said finally. I want honesty, respect, and mutual support. You want financial support and emotional validation without accountability. Maybe we do, she agreed. Then maybe we should stop trying to force something that isn't working. For the first time since this whole conflict began, Rebecca looked genuinely sad instead of strategically manipulative. So this is it? We're just done being sisters? We'll always be sisters, but we don't have to be friends. She nodded slowly, then turned and walked away without another word. As I watched her leave, I felt a complex mix of relief and grief. Relief that the constant manipulation and drama might finally be over. Grief for the sister relationship I'd always wanted but never actually had. After our confrontation at the conference, I thought Rebecca might finally accept that our relationship was permanently changed. I was wrong. If anything, being forced to acknowledge the truth about her motivations seemed to make her more determined to win the family war she'd started. Her new strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. She stopped attacking me directly, and instead focused on demonstrating how much she'd supposedly changed. Rebecca launched what I came to think of as her redemption tour, designed to show everyone that she was the sister who was willing to grow and make amends while I was the stubborn one holding grudges. It started with a group text to several family members. I've been doing a lot of soul-searching lately, and I realize I need to take responsibility for my part in the problems between Amber and me. I'm starting therapy to work on my issues, and I hope someday she'll be willing to give me another chance. The message was perfectly crafted. It acknowledged some wrongdoing without admitting to specific deceptions, positioned her as someone committed to personal growth, and subtly implied that I was the barrier to reconciliation. My phone started ringing within hours. "Amber," my mom said, her voice full of hope. "Rebecca sent us all a message about getting therapy and wanting to make things right. Don't you think this changes things? Mom, starting therapy doesn't undo 3 years of lies. And I noticed she still hasn't apologized for the specific things she did wrong. Sometimes people show change through actions rather than words." "What actions?" Sending a group text saying she's changed isn't an action. But the family was invested in believing Rebecca's transformation story. It was easier than acknowledging they'd been manipulated too. Easier than admitting they'd pressured me to accept unacceptable behavior. Rebecca followed up the therapy announcement with a series of carefully orchestrated gestures. She got a part-time job at a coffee shop. Not enough to support herself, but enough to claim she was being responsible. She started attending family events again, but with a humble, chastened demeanor that made people want to protect and encourage her. Most effectively, she began making subtle references to how much she missed having a sister, how she regretted taking our relationship for granted, and how she hoped someday I'd be willing to hear her apology. My Uncle Mark called me after Rebecca's latest performance at a family dinner. "She seems really different, Amber. More mature. She spent most of the evening asking about you and saying how much she missed talking to you." "Uncle Mark? Did she mention paying back any of the money she owes me? Or apologizing for humiliating me at my birthday party?" "Not specifically, but she did talk about wanting to make amends for her mistakes. Wanting to make amends and actually making them are different things." But I could hear in his voice that he was already convinced by Rebecca's act. She was winning the family narrative war by positioning herself as the sister who was trying to heal our relationship, while I was the one being unreasonably rigid. The pressure to give Rebecca another chance intensified when she played her most manipulative card yet. She started having what appeared to be panic attacks at family gatherings, claiming that the stress of our estrangement was affecting her mental health. My cousin Michelle called me after witnessing one of these episodes. "Amber, I don't know what happened between you two, but seeing Rebecca break down like that was really hard to watch. She could barely breathe, and she kept saying she just wanted her sister back." "Michelle, did it occur to you that someone who lied to me for 3 years might also be capable of performing fake panic attacks? That's a really cynical way to look at your sister's mental health struggles." And there it was. Rebecca had found the perfect shield. By claiming our estrangement was damaging her psychological well-being, she made any skepticism about her behavior look cruel and heartless. The family pressure reached a peak when my parents announced they were hosting a reconciliation dinner for Rebecca and me. They framed it as a neutral opportunity for us to work things out with family support. "We're not taking sides," my father explained when he called to invite me. "We just think it's time for this family conflict to end." "Dad, there's no conflict to end. Rebecca systematically lied to and manipulated me, and I've chosen not to accept that behavior anymore. That's not a conflict. That's a consequence." "Maybe you're right about what happened in the past," he said carefully. "But Rebecca seems genuinely committed to changing. Don't you think she deserves a chance to prove that? She's had dozens of chances over the years. How many more does she get? She's family, Amber. Sometimes family means forgiveness." I agreed to attend their dinner, but not for the reasons my parents hoped. I was tired of Rebecca controlling the narrative and making me look like the unreasonable sister. It was time for some truth-telling. The dinner was scheduled for the following Sunday at my parents' house. Rebecca arrived first, of course, helping my mother set the table and generally being the perfect helpful daughter. When I walked in, she looked up with carefully practiced vulnerability. "Amber," she said softly, "thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult for you." Everything about her performance was designed to make me look bad if I responded with anything other than warmth and forgiveness. She was playing the role of the humble, reformed sister, while positioning me as the grudge-holding villain. During dinner, Rebecca delivered what was clearly a rehearsed speech about taking responsibility for her mistakes and wanting to rebuild our relationship. She talked about therapy insights and personal growth, about learning to communicate better and handle stress more maturely. "I know I hurt you," she said, looking directly at me with tears in her eyes. "I know I took advantage of your generosity and your love. I can't undo that, but I want to earn back your trust. It was a masterful performance." My parents were practically glowing with relief and hope. This was the Rebecca they wanted to believe in, the struggling daughter who had learned from her mistakes and wanted to do better. "That's a lovely sentiment," I said when she finished. "Can you be more specific about which behaviors you're taking responsibility for?" Her expression flickered slightly. "Well, I took advantage of your financial help." "How specifically?" I wasn't always completely honest about how urgent my needs were. "What else?" I watched her scramble, trying to offer just enough admission to seem accountable without actually acknowledging the scope of her deceptions. "Rebecca," I said gently, "do you remember throwing my birthday cake on the floor in front of 30 people? The room went quiet. My parents looked uncomfortable. "I was drunk and emotional," she said. "I'm deeply sorry about that." "Do you remember posting pictures of expensive dinners and designer clothes on the same days you were texting me about being unable to afford groceries?" Her face went pale. "Those situations were complicated." "Do you remember threatening to destroy my reputation if I didn't continue giving you money?" I was desperate and said things I didn't mean. With each question, I could see her carefully constructed redemption narrative crumbling. The humble, reformed sister was being replaced by someone making excuses and minimizing her behavior. My parents were finally seeing what I'd been trying to tell them. Rebecca wasn't actually taking responsibility. She was performing responsibility while still avoiding accountability for her specific actions. "Rebecca," I said finally, "until you can honestly acknowledge what you did without excuses or minimization, we have nothing to discuss." The dinner ended awkwardly with my parents looking confused and disappointed. Rebecca's transformation story had been exposed as another manipulation, and the family was finally starting to see the routine. The failed reconciliation dinner marked a turning point in our family dynamics. For the first time since this conflict began, other family members started questioning Rebecca's version of events. When her carefully rehearsed redemption speech fell apart under basic questions about her specific behavior, people began to wonder what else she might have been dishonest about. My cousin Jake was the first to voice what others were thinking. He called me 2 days after the dinner to share a revelation that had been bothering him. "Amber, I've been thinking about what you said about Rebecca posting expensive dinners while claiming poverty. I actually remember some of those posts because they made me feel bad about my own financial situation. She was always at these nice restaurants and events while I was eating ramen and watching Netflix. It's amazing what becomes clear when you start paying attention to behavioral cycles instead of just accepting explanations." I replied, "That's just it. I never questioned the disconnect because Rebecca always had explanations for everything. Someone else paid for dinner, or she'd saved up for months for one special night, or it was a work event. There was always a reason that made me feel guilty for even noticing." Jake's awakening started a domino effect. Other family members began sharing their own Rebecca stories, many of which revealed a systematic approach to manipulative behavior that extended far beyond our relationship. My Aunt Carol called to tell me about a conversation she'd had with Rebecca at Christmas 2 years ago. She spent an hour complaining about how hard her life was and how everyone else had it easier. Then later that same day, I saw her showing off photos from a weekend spa trip she'd taken the week before. At the time, I thought maybe she'd needed the stress relief, but now I'm wondering if that was just another lie. Even my parents were starting to see things differently. My mother called me Thursday evening, sounding tired and confused. "Amber, I found something that's been bothering me." I was looking through old photos for Rebecca's birthday album, and I noticed that during the time she was claiming she couldn't afford to visit us for holidays, she was posting pictures from trips to beaches and ski resorts. That doesn't surprise me. Mom, but why would she lie about that? We never required her to visit. We just wanted to see her because being the struggling daughter who couldn't afford family visits got her sympathy and attention. Being the irresponsible daughter who chose vacations over family visits would have gotten her criticism. My mother was quiet for a long moment. I think I owe you an apology. I pressured you to help her without really understanding what was happening. It was the first acknowledgement from a family member that I hadn't been unreasonable in setting boundaries. The validation felt profound after months of being painted as the cold, heartless sister. But Rebecca wasn't finished fighting. When she realized that her redemption narrative had failed, and family members were starting to question her credibility, she made one final desperate play for control. She sent a long emotional email to the entire extended family claiming that I had been financially abusing her for years by holding money over her head and threatening to cut her off whenever she didn't behave exactly as I wanted. According to this new version of events, I was a controlling manipulator who had used her financial dependence to exert power over her life. The email was masterfully written, painting me as someone who had enjoyed having a desperate sister dependent on my generosity. She claimed that I had created the very dynamic I was now criticizing her for, that I had encouraged her dependence and then punished her for it when it became inconvenient. Amber turned me into someone who had to beg for help, she wrote, and then condemned me for being the person she created. It was her most sophisticated scheme yet, taking the grain of truth about my enjoying being needed and expanding it into a comprehensive explanation for all her behavior. If successful, it would reframe our entire relationship history, with me as the primary abuser and her as the victim of financial manipulation. Several family members called me after receiving the email, confused and upset by this new version of events. Is there any truth to what Rebecca is saying? My Uncle Tom asked carefully. Did you ever threaten to cut her off if she didn't behave a certain way, Uncle Tom? I threatened to cut her off if she continued lying to me about how she spent money. That's not controlling behavior. That's a reasonable boundary. But did you enjoy having her depend on you? That was the question that got to the heart of Rebecca's strategy. She was betting that my honest admission of having enjoyed feeling needed would make me look culpable for the entire dynamic. Probably, I said. I probably did get some satisfaction from being the successful sister who could help family members, but enjoying helping someone doesn't excuse them lying and manipulating you for years. So, you're admitting that you enabled the situation? I'm admitting that I didn't recognize scheming when it was happening, and that I may have inadvertently encouraged unhealthy dependence. But there's a difference between making mistakes and being deliberately deceptive. The conversation with my uncle revealed how effective Rebecca's final gambit was. By mixing legitimate criticism of my behavior with false narratives about financial abuse, she was creating enough confusion to muddy the waters around who was actually responsible for what. But her strategy ultimately backfired, because it required her to claim victimhood in a situation where she had been demonstrably deceptive. Family members who had seen the evidence of her lies and schemes weren't willing to believe that she had been the powerless victim all along. My cousin Michelle, who had initially been sympathetic to Rebecca's claims, called me after doing her own investigation. I asked Rebecca for specific examples of times when you threatened to withhold money to control her behavior. Michelle told me. She couldn't provide any. Every example she gave was actually about you setting boundaries around honesty or responsibility. What convinced you? I realized that someone who had been lying about their financial situation for years probably wasn't a reliable narrator about financial abuse either. Rebecca's final manipulation had failed because she had destroyed her own credibility. The family members who might have been willing to believe her claims of abuse had seen too much evidence of her dishonesty to trust her version of events. The war between us was finally ending, but not with reconciliation or forgiveness. It was ending with the recognition that some relationships are too damaged by betrayal and deception to be repaired. I felt relieved that the truth was finally clear to everyone, but also sad about what we'd lost. Not the relationship we actually had, which had been built on lies and exploitation, but the relationship I'd thought we had before I understood what was really happening. Sometimes the saddest part about setting boundaries with toxic people isn't losing them. It's realizing what you thought you had with them was never real in the first place. 6 months after our final confrontation, I thought the Rebecca situation was permanently resolved. She had moved to a different city. The family had largely accepted that our relationship was irreparably damaged, and I was enjoying the peace that came with not being anyone's personal ATM. Then she reappeared with a strategy I never saw coming. It started with a phone call from my mother on a Tuesday evening. "Amber, I have some news that might upset you, but I think you should hear it from family first." My stomach dropped. "What now?" "Rebecca is engaged." I was silent for a moment, processing this information. "Okay, good for her, I guess." "Amber, she's engaged to someone you know. She's marrying David Chen." The name hit me like a physical blow. David Chen, my former colleague from my previous job. Someone I'd dated casually for a few months 2 years ago. A really decent guy who I'd lost touch with after changing companies. "She's marrying David," I repeated, certain I'd misheard. "They've been dating for about 4 months, apparently. He proposed last weekend." I sat down heavily on my couch, trying to make sense of this development. Rebecca dating my ex-boyfriend was bizarre enough, but the timeline made it even stranger. 4 months ago was right around the time of our family reconciliation dinner disaster. Mom, how did they even meet? I'm not sure about the details. Rebecca mentioned something about running into him at a coffee shop. A coffee shop? I remembered David mentioning that he was a regular at a particular cafe near his office. It wouldn't have been difficult for Rebecca to figure out his routines if she'd wanted to engineer a chance encounter. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Did you see Rebecca's Facebook announcement? Girl, we need to talk." I hung up with my mother and immediately called Sarah back. "Please tell me this engagement is just a coincidence," Sarah said without preamble. 4 months, Sarah?" They've been dating for exactly 4 months, which means she started pursuing him right after her redemption tour failed. "You think she targeted him deliberately?" "I think Rebecca has spent the last 6 months realizing that she can't manipulate me anymore. So, she's moving on to someone connected to me, who might be easier to control." Sarah was quiet for a moment. That's actually terrifying if true. The scary part is how effective it could be. David is genuinely a good person. If Rebecca is playing the reformed, vulnerable woman who just wants stability and love, he'd be exactly the type to want to rescue her. "Are you going to warn him?" I stared at my phone, considering the question. Warning David would mean inserting myself into Rebecca's new relationship, which could look like jealousy or vindictiveness. But not warning him meant potentially watching her manipulate another decent person. "I don't know," I admitted. "What would I even say? Hey, your fiancé is my manipulative sister who might be using you to get back at me." He'd never believe it. Maybe not initially, but you could plant seeds of awareness. Help him see behavioral cycles if they start emerging. Before I could decide what to do, the decision was made for me. David called me the next evening. "Amber, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Rebecca gave me your number. I wanted to talk to you about something important." "Hi, David. I heard about your engagement. Congratulations." "Thank you. That's actually why I'm calling. Rebecca told me about the difficulties you two have been having, and I was hoping maybe we could work something out." I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. "What did she tell you exactly?" "She explained that there was a misunderstanding about money she borrowed from you, and that you've been estranged ever since. She's really torn up about it, Amber. She talks about missing you constantly." "A misunderstanding about borrowed money?" Of course, that's how Rebecca had framed years of systematic manipulation. "David, it's more complicated than that." "I'm sure it is. Family situations always are, but Rebecca is committed to making things right with you. She's been saving money to pay you back, and she's hoping that maybe you could find a way to be part of our wedding." I closed my eyes, seeing Rebecca's new strategy clearly. She was using David as an intermediary to force a reconciliation on her terms. If I refused to make peace with her, I'd look like someone who was sabotaging her relationship and happiness out of spite. David, can I ask you something? How much did Rebecca tell you she owed me? She said it was around $3,000 from various times when you helped her with rent and expenses. $3,000, not the actual $15,000. And no mention of the lies and schemes that had accompanied every transaction. And she's been saving to pay me back? Every penny she can spare. She's been working extra shifts at the coffee shop specifically to earn money for your repayment. I almost laughed. Rebecca working extra shifts to pay me back while simultaneously planning a wedding. The math didn't work, but David was too decent to question it. David, I appreciate you calling, and I hope you'll be very happy together. But my relationship with Rebecca is complicated in ways that go beyond money. She mentioned that too. She said, "You've always been hard on her because she wasn't as successful as you are." There it was. Rebecca was already laying the groundwork for explaining any future conflicts as jealousy-based rather than manipulation-based. "I'm sure that's how she sees it," I said carefully. "Look, I know I don't have the full picture," David continued. "But Rebecca is not the same person she was when these problems started. She's grown a lot. She's more responsible now, and she's committed to making amends with everyone she's hurt. David, can I give you some advice from someone who cares about you?" "Of course. Pay attention to cycles, not just words. Notice whether her actions consistently match her stated intentions. And if you ever start feeling like you're the only one solving her problems or making sacrifices for the relationship, trust that instinct." "Are you trying to warn me about something specific?" "I'm trying to encourage you to maintain your independence and trust your judgment if things don't feel balanced." After we hung up, I sat with the profound sadness of watching someone I cared about walk into the same trap I'd escaped. David was a good person who wanted to believe the best about people. Those qualities made him an ideal partner for someone genuine, but also an ideal target for someone manipulative. I knew that anything I said against Rebecca would be filtered through her narrative about jealous sisters and family drama. David would have to learn about her true nature through his own experience, just like I had. 2 weeks later, I received a wedding invitation. The ceremony was scheduled for 6 months out, at an expensive venue I knew David couldn't afford on his salary. Rebecca was already starting her cycle of creating financial pressure through lifestyle inflation. Inside the invitation was a handwritten note. "Amber, I know things have been difficult between us, but you're my sister and I want you at my wedding. David and I both hope you'll consider being there for this important day. Let's put the past behind us and focus on building a positive future. Love, Rebecca." The note was perfectly crafted to make me look petty if I declined. Rebecca was banking on social pressure and family expectations to force me back into her life on her terms. I wrote a polite response, declining the invitation and wishing them happiness. I didn't explain my reasons, because any explanation would sound like I was trying to sabotage their relationship. But I also did something else. I wrote a letter to David that I didn't send, outlining everything Rebecca had done and the behavioral cycles I'd observed. I sealed it and put it in my safety deposit box, with instructions that it should be given to him if he ever asked my family for information about Rebecca's behavior. It felt like planting a time capsule of truth for a future that I hoped would never come, but suspected was inevitable. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to document the truth, even if they're not ready to hear it yet. 1.5 years later, David called me again. This time his voice was tired and confused, rather than hopeful and optimistic. "Amber, I know this is awkward, but I need to ask you something about Rebecca. Something's not adding up, and I'm hoping you can help me understand what I'm dealing with. I've been expecting this call for months." "What's going on, David?" "We've been married for 8 months, and I'm starting to see behavioral cycles that remind me of things you tried to warn me about. Rebecca has financial issues that don't make sense. She spends money we don't have, and then has panic attacks about debt. She creates emergencies that require me to fix them, but the emergencies always seem to happen right when I'm establishing boundaries about something else. I'm sorry you're going through this. The thing is, I've started paying attention to what you said about cycles versus words, and the routines are starting to look really familiar, based on some stories other family members have shared about your relationship with her. I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. David was discovering what I'd learned the hard way, that Rebecca's problems weren't bad luck or temporary struggles, but deliberate strategies for maintaining control and avoiding responsibility. What finally made you start questioning things? I asked. Last month, Rebecca had what she called a financial emergency. She needed $2,000 immediately to prevent some catastrophic consequence that was never quite clearly explained. I gave her the money, and then I found out she'd spent $800 of it on clothes that same week. What did she say when you confronted her about it? She cried and said she'd bought the clothes before the emergency came up and that she'd forgotten about the purchase when she asked for money. She was so upset about my lack of trust that I ended up apologizing for questioning her. I recognized the tactic immediately. Create such an emotional reaction to being questioned that the questioner ends up focusing on managing the emotions rather than getting answers. David, do you mind if I ask you something personal? Go ahead. How often do you find yourself apologizing for things that weren't your fault? He was quiet for a long moment. Too often, a lot more than I ever did in previous relationships. And how often does Rebecca take responsibility for problems without blaming circumstances or other people? Another pause. Almost never now that you mention it. David was having the same awakening I'd experienced. That moment when you stop seeing individual incidents as isolated problems and start recognizing them as part of a larger system of manipulation and control. Amber, I need to ask you directly. How much money did Rebecca actually owe you when you cut her off? $15,000 over 3 years. And that was just direct financial assistance, not counting times I covered group dinners or family expenses she should have contributed to. Jesus. She told me it was $3,000 total, and that you were being unreasonable about repayment terms. David, Rebecca has never been honest about money. Not with me, and probably not with you either. I'm starting to see that. I found credit card statements showing purchases she denied making. I've discovered expenses she's hidden from me. And every time I try to have a conversation about budgeting or financial responsibility, it turns into an emotional crisis about how I don't trust her or support her dreams. What are you going to do? I don't know. Part of me thinks maybe I can help her learn better habits. Part of me wonders if I'm just setting myself up for years of this kind of drama. David, can I tell you something I wish someone had told me? Please. You can't fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. And you can't love someone into becoming honest if they prefer manipulation. Rebecca's problems aren't caused by lack of opportunity or support. They're caused by her choice to take the easy path instead of the responsible one. But she says she wants to change. She's always talking about wanting to be better. Wanting to change and actually changing are different things. Has Rebecca demonstrated any actual behavior changes? Or does she just talk about wanting to change when the consequences of her current behavior become uncomfortable? David sighed deeply. Just talking mostly. Every time I think we've made progress, something happens that puts us right back where we started. That's not progress. David, that's a cycle. We talked for another hour with David, sharing examples of Rebecca's behavior that were depressingly familiar. The manufactured emergencies, the emotional manipulation when questioned, the way she'd rewrite history to make herself the victim of any conflict. The hardest part, he said near the end of our conversation, is that I can see glimpses of the person I fell in love with. When things are going well, she's sweet and loving and makes me feel like we can work through anything together. That's called intermittent reinforcement, I told him. It's one of the most powerful manipulation tactics because it keeps people hoping that the good times represent the real person and the bad times are just temporary setbacks. So, the woman I married, she's not real? She's one version of Rebecca that comes out when she's getting what she wants without effort. But the version that lies and manipulates and creates drama, that's real too. Maybe more real because it's what happens when she faces any kind of accountability or boundaries. David was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. I think I need to make some difficult decisions about my marriage. Whatever you decide, David, make sure you're making the choice based on reality rather than hope. Base it on behavioral cycles you've observed rather than promises about future change. After we hung up, I felt the familiar sadness that came with watching someone else discover Rebecca's true nature. But I also felt something like relief that David was questioning the situation before years had passed and more damage was done. 3 months later, David filed for divorce. According to family gossip, Rebecca was shocked and devastated, claiming that David had abandoned her just like I had. She couldn't understand why people who claimed to love her would give up so easily when things got difficult. The irony was profound. Rebecca still saw herself as the victim of other people's inability to handle challenges, rather than as someone whose behavior created unnecessary challenges for everyone around her. My relationship with Rebecca never recovered, and I no longer wanted it to. I'd learned that some people are fundamentally incompatible with healthy relationships, not because they're evil, but because they're committed to behavioral cycles that make genuine connection impossible. Today, I have strong boundaries around my time, energy, and resources. I choose relationships with people who give as much as they take, who tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable, and who take responsibility for their choices and consequences. I still love my sister in the complicated way you love family members who hurt you. But I love myself enough now to refuse relationships that require me to deny reality or abandon my own well-being. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst behaviors. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who mistake your kindness for weakness. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries and recognizing manipulation. Family relationships don't have to be toxic just because they're family. The Bank of Amber remains permanently closed. And honestly, business has never been better.